Hello, my name is Alexander Mack. My chapter offers a way to understand some of the challenges of global interdependencies, in particular, the overlapping ecological, economic, violence, health, and migration risks faced by contemporary society. This is through an understanding of the means of orientation, how people come to think, feel, and know about themselves and their societies. The chapter argues that the process sociology refined by Norbert Elias and the ecological risk sociology developed by Ulrich Beck and Elizabeth Beck-Gernsheim are united by the desire to confront the ambiguities of human relations. That span both wider globalized relations through to individualized life choices. Unintended consequences or risks can be understood in ways that avoid the perpetuation of an overly optimistic or a pessimistic future, but also avoid the reduction into static concepts such as class, the family, and industrial hazards. The Becks in particular recognized that understanding the world through risks has become an important form of orientation. The term and the concept of risk cannot simply be limited to a technical term for professions such as risk analysis and the insurance industry. Risk is interdependence with forms of sociological relations and knowledge processes. So the Becks drew attention to the power relations of global risk societies. This is and how people and their groups assert their power claims across an open spectrum of harmless, safe, low risk, and more harmful, catastrophic, high risks. The possibility of safety and or catastrophe defines how people live their lives that are simultaneously global and local. The chapter concludes with the discussion of global double-bind processes, the interconnected ecological, economic, violence, health, and migration struggles faced by contemporary societies. Each of these 5 struggles represent the repercussions of long-term human practices. These are characterized by anxieties between collective nationalist attachments to state society and humanist egalitarian attachments to book. There are 2 wider circumstances that influence this book chapter. Firstly, it is a partial distillation of the 2 conceptual chapters from my PhD thesis completed at Aberystwyth University. These thesis chapters combine the concepts of process and risk sociology to develop a sociology for shared anxieties. These terms then assisted an investigation into representations of transnational migration reflected in the language of United Kingdom and Australian Prime Ministers from 2001 to 2017. Secondly, the chapter was written during the 2019-20 Australian bushfires. This was when major cities from Sydney, with a population of 5 million people, through to smaller communities across southeastern Australia, experienced harmful levels of smoke haze. The fires were exacerbated by the effects of climate change. Sections of the Australian government blamed arsonists for the fires and deflected responsibility away from reducing carbon emissions, which would mitigate the catastrophic risks of future fires. The fires exposed some of the contradictions in Australian society across ecological and economic struggles. There's a continuing idealisation of the natural environment seen in tourism advertisements. This is interconnected by the belief that financial capital accumulation should be a marker of success in Australian society, even if that comes at the expense of ecological destruction and harms to human health. The chapter was completed at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. So now I'm going to briefly discuss the notion of global health bias, using the example of the European Union and focusing on responses within the EU to the pandemic. The EU is a fascinating example because responses to the pandemic showcase degrees of integration from people, local health authorities, national governments, wider health expertise, EU institutional coordination, and broader global efforts. In the early stages, there was a national scramble for masks and personal protective equipment. At this time, German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas justified the national survival reflex through the analogy of a decompressing aeroplane. This is where one puts on one's own mask before helping others. Yet, cooperation pressures were soon reasserted through, for example, the sharing of patients between French and German hospitals, the vaccine procurement efforts by the EU Commission, which sought to avoid a destructive national confrontation over vaccine supplies. The pandemic has exacerbated economic struggles over the EU budget and recovery fund. There have been most notably degrees of stringent restrictions over the movement of people. Everyday life movements across cities, towns, and member states have become defined by the harmful risks of contracting the virus. EU members have sought to strengthen protections for the victims of gender-based violence in light of the pressures of lockdowns. There have been highly publicized incidences of street violence by people opposing pandemic restrictions. Finally, in terms of ecological struggles, the virus has been exacerbated by the harmful effects of air pollution on human health. Areas, for example, areas of northern Italy, which experience high levels of air pollution, also experienced high mortality rates from the virus. So it's going to be interesting to see moving forward how EU members manage the five struggles going ahead. In the near future, I would like to expand this book chapter into my first book that provides a more detailed account of ecological, economic, violence, and human movement struggles. So hopefully This is not the last time you'll be hearing about global double-bind processes.